The spotlight is clearly on Oxfam at the moment, understandably so, because there are also allegations today that there were 120 cases of sexual harassment in Oxfam shops over the last 9 years. But I wonder whether you think that it's fair that all of this spotlight is being thrown on Oxfam when, if it happens in one charity, it's probably something similar is probably going on in others. Do you think it is endemic in this sector? Do you think the whole subject of international aid and development is effectively being brought into disrepute and playing into the hands of those who think that we shouldn't be spending hardly any money at all on this issue? Is there a little bit of a witch hunt going on here, which could actually be very damaging for charitable giving in the past? And if there is, who's behind it? 0345 6060 973. Well, I'm joined in the studio by Nicholas Rutherford, Event Director at AidEx, which is a platform for professionals in humanitarian aid and international development to come together and improve the efficiency of aid. Nicholas, welcome. Do you think there's any sort of witch hunt going on here?
I think people's attitude towards this situation is entirely understandable. When you send people out into the world to look after vulnerable people, the most vulnerable people in the world, and the people who are supposed to be caring and helping them, caring for them and helping for them, are in fact doing these sorts of things, then it's really sad, very disappointing. I think it's unlikely that it's just Oxfam. I think, that this sort of thing has occurred in other aid agencies, but so it has.
Why haven't we heard about it then?
We do hear about it. I think stories about aid and development are usually negative, and sadly we don't hear about all the positives. The aid community do a fantastic job overall, and go into very dangerous places. They risk their lives, and by and large, those that I have seen, I regularly go to Nairobi and I go to Bangladesh. By and large, those that I see are heroes. These guys clearly have brought disrepute on the sector. I'm just hoping that this doesn't damage all aid agencies, all charities. I hope we don't tar everybody with the same brush. We've seen this sort of thing in UK government. We've seen this sort of thing in the BBC. Institutions that we trust, and sadly, this is the same.
I had a caller on yesterday who rather ludicrously, I thought, and said that Oxfam should be shut down because of this. And I said to him, well, hang on a minute. Terrible though it is one incident. Now, there probably are one or two others, but Oxfam is such a massive organisation, just as many other charities are. Now, clearly, they hadn't got the right procedures in to prevent this from happening, or indeed to report it properly, as it turns out. But do you think that the coverage of this has been in any way unfair towards Oxfam?
No, I don't. I think, as I said earlier on, it's understandable. I'm not going to try and defend Oxfam. They did, as it would appear to everybody, try to cover things up, and I think that's what's exacerbated the situation. I can understand why they might have tried to cover things up, because they were frightened of all the negative publicity. These organisations rely on the goodwill and charity of people at large, the ordinary guy on the street. And if they lose that, they get a certain amount of funding from the government, but they really do rely on you and I to donate in our buckets walking down the street.
Have some of them become too big, though? And I do mean Oxfam with that. I think we could name several other organisations of an equal size. Sometimes, when organisations get too big, they are impossible to police properly. It's impossible to introduce the necessary safeguarding procedures. Has Oxfam fallen into that category?
I think the reason why the organisations are so big is because the challenges they face are huge. The scale of poverty around the world, the scale of disease, wars, malnutrition, all these terrible things that we see on the news nightly, these are massive issues, and the UN, which are, one would argue, the leaders within the sector, they can't cope with the situation. The NGOs are stepping into a gap which needs to be urgently filled, and by and large they do a great job. Look, clearly this situation hasn't worked. I'm not going to defend people that have done these terrible things. We've got to try and prevent this sort of thing happening again in the future. Maybe we need another independent body other than just the Charities Commission that can help to police the aid sector. But what I am saying is it seems to be part of human nature that these sorts of things occur in the most unlikely places, as I said, the BBC, British government, the church, everywhere.
Do you think that Oxfam itself might be facing a so-called Ratner's moment, where its brand is so damaged by this that we read in the papers today of people saying, "Well, I saw one woman saying, I've been doing a direct debit for 36 years. I've just cancelled it." Are we looking at that kind of scenario?
We might be. I hope that's not the case, because Oxfam have, to this point, done a fantastic job in the world. They're one of the leading organisations that have provided, the moral compass that we all felt so proud of. So this is terrible. If you were an aid worker working in the field for Oxfam and you knew that you had done all the right things, you'd risked your life, you were working in a hostile environment, working very hard, and then some people some years ago had done these terrible things, you would feel sick to the heart, and I just feel so sorry for them. I, again, would urge people to understand that the aid sector as a whole does fantastic work. These are very good people. The challenges are huge, and the world relies on them.
What needs to change in the aid sector? Because you said earlier on that you thought that maybe they don't talk about the successes. We hear a lot about the money that's wasted, and inevitably there will be some, given the sums of money we're talking about. But whenever we talk about aid on this programme, obviously I get a lot of people ringing and saying, well, charity begins at home, we should be building more hospitals and using the money from the aid budget to do so. It's not just a simple PR exercise that the sector needs to carry out now, is it? There needs to be evidence of change.
Well, the sector works very hard to be transparent and accountable, and I go to endless events where, there are seminars, conferences, workshops, and the sector agonises about how it can be more transparent and more accountable, more so than the commercial sector. The commercial sector works with the aid sector these days because, again, the scale of the problems are so huge, and the reason why civil society is nervous of the commercial sector is because they're not always as transparent as they should be. So again, in terms of money and in terms of financial corruption and things like that, I think the aid sector is on its way to improving the way it conducts itself and making sure that the funds get to the people at the coalface, the people who really need it. But this is unfortunate. I'm sure there are going to be other cases. I don't think it's just Oxfam. I think there are other institutions where this sort of thing is going to crop up, and we do have to find a better way of policing civil society. People are working in locations far from London, where rule of law has broken down, and there is a level of trust that they're going to do the right thing. But for some devious people, perhaps paedophiles, it makes it easier for them because they're in such a situation.
Nicholas, thank you very much. That's Nicholas Rutherford, Event Director at AidEx.